Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Khalid. But today is Monday, the 13th of March 2023, and these are the stories that we will be discussing in detail during the course of this show. We'll begin with the resumption of formal ties between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Iran after a period of 7 years. How is this going to impact the Muslim world and, of course, Pakistan, that has a very strong relationship with both the countries? Friday, both the countries decided to re-establish diplomatic relations and reopen their embassies also after this long hiatus of 7 years. A very welcome development by many in the Muslim world. Some of the skeptics are there, of course, and then there is a question of Israel. Where does that leave the Middle East policy as far as Israel is concerned, and how is the Muslim world going to vote forward after this reunion of sorts between both the countries? This is going to be our first segment. Our second story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns China. That also brokered the deal between Iran and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Now, in China, there have been two very important moves. The first is, of course, as we know, the third time re-election of Xi Jinping as a president of the People's Republic of China. He gave a very important speech, and we'll be talking about the different aspects of that speech. We'll also be talking about Premier Xi Jinping's, Premier Li Keqiang's interview with the media, in which he also highlighted some of the important policies that the government is going to go forward with. That and more, China's future, China's relationship with the world, and how China is going to strengthen itself internally and externally in this third term of President Xi Jinping is going to be part of our second segment. Then we'll be talking about Israel and Palestine. Nothing new there, but as the barbarities continue on more or less a daily basis, we have to inform our audience of what Israel is up to. Now, the Israeli military says its forces shot and killed 3 Palestinians who opened fire on soldiers in the occupied West Bank. They said the men were killed on Sunday by Israeli fire near the city of Nablus and have identified them as well. But of course, there's always the counter question of how all of this is happening, why all of this is happening, and what is the reason behind the Palestinians who are revolting. This is going to be our third story. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, the 95th Academy Awards, otherwise known as the Oscars, happened this morning in Pakistan, but of course on Sunday evening in the United States of America. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once took 7 Oscars, including Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actress, Best Supporting Actor, Best Film, Best Director, and Best Screenplay. 7 Oscars, which is a huge feat. And also there are other films that also took some of the Oscars, but the highlight of this Oscar event was Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. This is going to be our last story. Let's begin with our first, and that concerns, ladies and gentlemen, the resumption of formal diplomatic ties between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Iran. The reopening of embassies and diplomatic ties are being re-established after a hiatus of 7 years. More in the following report.
Better diplomatic tensions have been spiraling over the past several months between great powers. China's efforts in brokering a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia depict broader signs of a changing global order. During talks in Beijing, Saudi Arabia and Iran agreed to re-establish diplomatic relations and reopen their embassies within 2 months. The agreement also stipulated affirming the respect for the sovereignty of states and the non-interference in internal affairs of states. The trilateral statement also significantly mentioned the 2001 security arrangement and the broader 1998 cooperation agreement that Iran and Saudi Arabia had reached. Those agreements entailed a lot of economic, security, political cooperation, and high-level diplomatic contact. The agreement has potentially wide implications for Middle East, which is gripped by multiple politico-economic and security challenges. Better diplomatic linkages between Saudi Arabia and Iran will reduce the likelihood for regional conflict and will reduce regional tensions. China's role as a mediator in resolving long-standing issues between the regional powers heralds new era of multilateral world order. Saudi-Iran deal is an indication of new Middle East, where states are acting more independently of global powers. Resumption of normal relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia provides great capacities to the two countries, the region, and the Islamic world.
A very welcome development indeed, and a development that has been welcomed by the Muslim world in general, the European Union and other countries as well. But of course, there are skeptics, and we all know who they are. We have been joined in the studios by Dr. Zafar Nawaz Jaspal, who is a foreign affairs expert and somebody who knows the Middle East like no other. Dr. Saab, thank you very much to have joined us. Dr. Saab, now that resumption of formal diplomatic ties, opening of embassies is happening between the two countries after a period of 7 years, something that that was brokered by the People's Republic of China. What do you feel are going to be the global implications?
I think that the developments have, for example, on 10th, as it was announced, that both sides agreed to resume their diplomatic relations and opening up their embassies, as you pointed out very rightly. I think that it would be having a national impact in both states, very much regional impact, and from the region on the global. So as you asked the question about the global, I think that it's a remarkable development in this transforming global geopolitics. Chinese are taking a lead in the Middle East, and it seems that the Americans are now gradually giving a space to them, deliberately or inadvertently, in this region. So when these two giants of the Muslim world, I mean Saudi Arabia and the Iran, when they are agreed to deal certain issues and establish or work together for bringing a peace in Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, certainly it is going to stabilize the MENA, stabilize the Gulf region, and prosper or decrease their dependency on the Western world for military hardware or these kind of things. At the same time, it is going to highlight another dimension, that where the Qatar, Turkey in the MENA will be standing. Though when the Saudis adopted a containment policy against Qatar in 2017, Turkey and Iran were supportive to that, but then now with their arrangement or engagement, that will be going to bring a peace. But when we look about the global, within the global, their cooperation boosts the economic prosperity, regional and global. Their cooperation would be lower the, or you can say, tension and lesser security dilemma puzzle and lesser arms race in the region. And above all, their cooperation or understanding is going to facilitate in getting rid of non-state actors, or what we call a terrorist syndicate in the region.
A lot of parties have taken advantage of the tension between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Iran, and now that they are back on track to developing normal relations, I think they must be not heaving a sigh of relief, unlike many others.
I think that the biggest relief is if you trace this diplomatic, you can say, suspension or cut off. That was from the 2016, when 50 plus Shati community members were executed for a protest or revolt in Saudi Arabia and famous Sheikh, and then there was attack on the Saudi's embassy in Tehran. And after that, we have seen that there was diplomatic, and this tension had, or you can say, has contributed negatively in the sectarian harmony. So I mean that it has strengthened sectarian cancer in not only in the Middle East, but in the states like Pakistan and in the region. So now both states are going to deal with this, and if you see, this agreement has been brokered in Beijing by the Chinese, and both sides' national security advisors were there. So that is a revealing that diplomatic ties have been established with the lead with the national securities, not by the foreign affairs, you can foreign ministers of both sides. So it means that both states realized that they have to cooperate for the national securities. They have to cooperate for the safety and security of their own people as well as their prosperity.
So of course, this is an extremely welcome development for all the people in the region, and the region in particular, and I hope that this is just the first chapter of many good chapters that are going to follow as far as this relationship is concerned. Dr. Jamil Ahmed Khan Sahab joins us online. He is a former ambassador and a foreign affairs expert. Dr. Jamil Ahmed Khan, thank you very much to have joined us. Dr. Jamil Ahmed Khan, the world has reciprocated in a very positive sense. I'd like to give some of the highlights as far as the different countries and regions that have reacted to this, whether it be the European Union that acknowledges the diplomatic efforts leading to this important step. France has welcomed it, Egypt has welcomed it, Tunisia and the UAE, then we've got Bahrain, Algeria, Algeria, Turkey, Lebanon, and Sudan, who have also given very positive reactions to all of this. Kuwait's foreign ministry has said the agreement was key to building trust and developing friendly relations between both the countries. Jordan, Syria, they have all been very positive in their remarks. But there's one headline, and I'd like to have your point of view on that. There's one headline in a very major publication, international publication, that says Saudi deal with Iran worries Israel, shakes up the Middle East. What's your take on that?
Well, before we understand that point and before I illustrate on that point, in fact, one has to recognize Chinese very subtle economic influence, which has transformed into a political influence now. And China now is in a position to mediate such a complex and complicated issue, which was persistent last many decades. And in fact, if we go into the history, then it's right from the very beginning, the Persians and the Arabs. So, but under that backdrop, Chinese had a very good and a very nice breakthrough. And they have not really worked it for these 10 days. They were about last 20 years investment of China in it. I'm coming on Israel. So China, with that, very slow, like
Could you speak
they
a
are
bit
the.
louder? I can't hear you.
I said that China has taken about 20 years to have this influence, what you see now for the mediation. And now China, being the key member, rather the pioneer member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as well as the ECO member. So if we combine these factors together, China has now entered into a bloc which comprises and consists of 57 countries, and that's OIC. We all understand that Saudi Arabia has its greater influence, and the seat of the OIC is there in Riyadh. So they have had this a very good breakthrough, not only the Saudi Arabia, but in the OIC countries through Saudi Arabia, plus the Gulf countries and the Arab League countries. So that's one part. Let's view it from Israel and China. They are very good friends. They have their trade relations, they have their military relations, and they never had any problem. So I'm sure that China, through its diplomacy, has that factor in mind. And at subsequent stages, the JCPO, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which is the nuclear deal with Iran, on which Israel was very sore, and on which Israel and United States have been doing their joint exercises to ensure that that Iran do not cross that enrichment level. Although Iran has already crossed that level of 83.7% of enrichment. Now, under that backdrop, I'm sure behind the curtain, there are other things also happening. Why European countries like France, Germany, and so many other countries you just mentioned, why they are welcoming it? Because they were the stakeholders in negotiating the nuclear accord deal. And why they were interested? The Iran should join that, because that was addressing the concern. And through that deal, as we all know, they knew that IAEC would be able to have their handle and their watch on it. So with this through Saudi Arabia and Iran, one, that this block of SCO and ECO, of which the Iran is the member and the Turkey is member, so they have in their charter, there's common goals both of SCO and ECO, India being a member of SCO. So I see a very important change in the geopolitical scenario in the coming few years in this region. Now, the interest of United States, yes, interest of United States would definitely like to protect its interest. They have a right to do that. Now, what are those interests? The containment of China is their very salient feature of the foreign policy. Now, containment after this kind of influence of China, and once I'm talking of China, we cannot ignore Russia. Russia, after about almost 35, 40 years, first time they were able to have the access to Mediterranean Sea, and they were able to bring their warship in Mediterranean Sea through Syria. Now, Syrian port at the base. So Russia, China, SU members, ECU members, they definitely make a very strong bloc. And the protection which Gulf countries wanted from United States, and still they want the protection, the security protection. I think China, Russia together, and particularly China, not only they can provide them a economic cover, diplomatic cover, but they can subsequently, not now, subsequently, they would be in a position to provide them the military cover. Now, the story doesn't end here. Basically,
I think there are
on
many
the
more
one
chapters
side,
to be read through as far as this relationship is concerned. But let me come back to you in a short while. Dr. Zafar Nawaz Jaspal Saab, let's go a little bit through the deal, the deal or the talks as the resultant statement that has come after the resumption of ties. The countries announced an agreement reached between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Islamic Republic of Iran, that includes resumption of diplomatic ties, reopening embassies with the period not exceeding 2 months. Then their affirmation of respect for the sovereignty of states and the non-interference in the internal affair of the states. Then there is return of their ambassadors and discuss meanings of enhancing bilateral relations, implementing security cooperation agreement. I think that's a very important point, signed signed before in 2001. The general agreement for cooperation in the fields of economy, trade, investment, technology, science, culture, sports and youth, that was also signed in 1998. And the keenness to exert all efforts toward enhancing regional and international peace and security. These are all extremely important points. And I cannot but laud the efforts of China for having brokered this deal between the two countries. How easy or not is the practical application of all of these elements of the statement?
I think that the agreement which you identified, they are there. Both states agreed on it, and since 2 decades they failed to materialize or execute these agreements, whatever the reasons were. But anyway, now they are once again on the track, and in this context, the primacy which they are assigning to these agreements or similar kind of things. We have to see that this time the broker is China, which maintains good relations with both states, 400 billion plus strategic partnership with the Iran, and similar kind of a trade sort of a agreements or these things with the Saudi Arabia, not formal like a strategic partnership, but that. China seems a mediator and guarantor between the two states. Prior to that, if we see that though the Americans were there, but the Americans' tilt was in favor of the Saudis and Iranians were not trusting them. Pakistan tried to, you can say, cultivate better relations between both these strategic powers, I mean Iran and Saudi Arabia, especially the previous government or even the current government. But being a neighboring state of Iran and strategic partner of Saudi Arabia, sometimes they hear, sometimes not. OIC did it. But if you see this time, the China, which is the leading global power, economic house, and strategically very important in Asia, that is sponsoring and granting their agreement.
So I think that's a very important guarantee.
Third party, which is stronger than earlier third parties intervene. They try to facilitate their relations, but those third parties were not as stronger as China.
And there might be, I'm sure, back channel diplomacy and diplomatic efforts by other countries as well, as has been highlighted by Ambassador Jamil Ahmed Khan Saab, who are not on the forefront but have helped China also broker this deal between the two countries. But China's effort and China's action will put a very strong stamp as far as the future geopolitical and geoeconomic situation of the region is concerned.
I think that amongst the other countries, of course, there are many overt and covert supporters to this positive development in the region. But Pakistan's efforts can be not ignored, because
of course.
Pakistan's interests converge with this, because that's the reason Pakistan have been maintaining, not because of cultural, religious, economic ties, but we think that if there is a peace and cooperation between the two, Saudi Arabia and Iran, it would be having a positive impact not only on Pakistan but on the entire region and Muslim world, and especially their cooperation is very imperative for two things. First is to killing this or hindering the Islamic phobia in the at the global level, and second is this increasingly radicalized militancy in the shape of terrorist organizations. So if both the states cooperate, then it's easier.
There's going to have a direct and indirect impact on all of these very important factors that you've just mentioned. Last question to you, Ambassador Jamil Ahmed Khan Saab. I was reading through the Israeli reactions. Although Netanyahu has not given a direct reaction, but there was a reaction from his office that blames the previous Israeli government for having led to this situation that Israel apparently is not happy with. And of course, there has also been a lot of Israeli reaction from other previous Israeli leaders as well. Is Israel really not happy? Did Israel know of this deal before it happened? And what is going to be the future, in your point of view? I'd like a short answer to that, of the relations between Israel and Iran. And of course, the tensions that have been existing in the Middle East. Do you feel there is going to be a certain thaw, if not complete, removal of tensions in the region?
Yeah, after Abraham Accord, number one, and number two, now the brokered peace deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Israel automatically has its stake in it. Now, Israel has its trade and commerce interest. That's number one. And Israel also has a strategic interest in the Gulf countries, where he already has in Abraham Accord very good relations with the UAE, Bahrain, and across the channel with Sudan, Morocco, and many more countries are now queued up in following out. So if we look at that, then there seems to be some very big strategic consideration for Israel also, which meets the requirement of United States. United States, after having spent more than about $4 trillion in this region, in terms of Iraq war, in terms of Afghanistan war, in terms of Syria, in terms of other conflicts, they have gained hardly anything in it. And now they are trying to reach to a stage through whatever mechanism. And one of
course,
this mechanism
and I hope
is
these
China.
mechanisms can only lead to positive developments in the region and further improvement in the ties between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Islamic Republic of Iran. We all side with this agreement, and we all are behind both the countries and our Muslim Ummah, so that we can become one again. And of course, a single fist together it's much stronger than 5 fingers that are separate. So this is a very old how should I say, statement that was being said, but it holds true even to this day. Thank you so very much, Ambassador Jamil Ahmed Khan Saab. Thank you so very much, Dr. Zafar Nawaz Jaspal Saab, to have joined us, to have talked to us about this important deal that was brokered on Friday thanks to China, and a lot of positive developments and reactions that have happened from the different parts of the world. Let's just hope that all of these statements, the parts of the statements, are translated into tangible action in the coming weeks. Our second segment, ladies and gentlemen, concerns China, concerns the different developments that have happened. We all know that President Xi Jinping has returned for a third term. He has also talked, he has also given a statement, so has Li Keqiang, while talking to the media about the different facets of how China is going to move forward. More in the following report.
There is unprecedented development in China as Xi Jinping was unanimously elected President of the People's Republic of China and Chairman of the Central Military Commission of the PRC at 14th National People's Congress. The announcement was followed by fervent declarations of allegiance by delegates to the Chinese Constitution in a demonstration of loyalty and unanimity. The final day of China's annual parliamentary meeting, known as the National People's Congress, brought together nearly 3,000 delegates from across China, saw the election of President Xi Jinping for third term, appointment of a new premier Li Qiang, and a host of other senior functionaries. In the first speech of his precedent-breaking third term as president, Xi Jinping underscored that China should actively participate in the reform and construction of the global governance system and promote global security initiatives. New Premier Li Qiang stressed the need for China to enhance its scientific and technological innovation capabilities and focus on high-quality development. China's leader Xi Jinping emphasized that China's role will add positive energy to world's peace and development. Xi's re-election is the zenith of a remarkable rise in which he has become the leader of a rising global power, and the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation has entered an irreversible historical process.
Now, to discuss more about this, we've been joined by Mustafa Hyder Sayyed. He's Executive Director of Pak-China Institute. Mustafa, thank you very much to have joined us. Mustafa, first of all, you who understands China and the Chinese perspective, what only positive developments that are coming from the Chinese side, whether it be in the form of brokering the deal between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Iran, or the third term of President Xi Jinping, and the different statements that have emanated from Xi Jinping and also Li Keqiang. How do you view all of those in the current geopolitical and geoeconomic context?
You know, there's a saying that there are decades in which nothing happens, and then there are weeks in which decades happen.
True.
So this is the latter. In a very short period of time, we've seen a lot has happened, and it has been groundbreaking and historic. So let's start with the external development first of the Iran-Saudi détente. You know that the Middle East was the traditional playing field of the United States for many years and many decades, and its partners. So this is the first time that an Eastern power, a new power, which is sometimes known as a revisionist power, has come and has played its cards very well and has succeeded.
True.
And that too quietly, without touting the horn or making a big fuss.
It must have
about
surprised so many when they read the news.
And at the same time, Middle East has always been an area which has been divided through premeditated geopolitics, and a zero-sum mentality has been imposed there. That's how it was, playing one against the other, and that caused instability within the region. As you know, what was happening in Yemen, what was happening in Syria, Lebanon, proxies, and even in Pakistan, to be very honest. So for the first time, a foreign power that didn't have any excess baggage, that was seen as an above board player, has come and has put them together and has succeeded. So this is an indication, I would say, that
the
China has
come.
arrived on the international stage.
All right, wonderful. Xi Jinping, the Chinese president now in a third term for the People's Republic of China, has emphasized that China needs to actively participate in the reform and construction of the global governance system and promote global security initiatives. How, in your point of view, somebody who understands China very well, how important is going to be China's global role in order to add positive energy to world peace and development? One example of which we've just recently seen.
I think that's a great question because when we talk about China's global foreign policy, it's very important to understand that China has consistently followed a policy of non-interference in international affairs. It has never interfered in other countries' internal affairs, unless with consent of something like rapprochement, which has just happened. So when we talk about the rules of the game, and a lot of the times the Chinese are dictated to that, these are the rules of the game, this or else. And we've seen that China has, without any aggression, said that rules of the game made by a few countries cannot be called global rules of the game and global international politique. So China has, I believe, very quietly, persistently, through economic growth, slowly restructured the global framework of international relations. And I'll tell you how, before we go to the next question. If you talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, which is, as you know, is over 165 countries are signatories to it. Not only Pakistan and African countries, which is the common perception that only the third world, but Italy, Greece, Czechoslovakia, European countries, even Japan, South Korea are part of the Belt and Road Initiative. So, which is of course mega investment in these countries. And then the trading of oil with Saudi Arabia, because this deal had two very important visits. before this deal happened. The first visit of President Xi Jinping after the 3 years of quarantine in China, where he didn't leave China, was to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where he said to Mohammed bin Salman, His Royal Highness, that we will buy oil from you for the next decades with RMB. That answers your question, because the biggest lever or weapons, as some call it, that the United States has is the USD, is the dollar currency, because everything, as you know, is underwritten in dollars, and that is, of course, which is also used to punish countries and sanctions and everything. So we see that China, through soft power, is now, but without aggression and without trying to replace any country, is altering the financial architecture and the political architecture of the international global system.
All right, Mustafa, I'd also like to understand the way China wants to move forward under its new leadership internally. And I'd like to highlight some parts of the statements of Excellency Xi Jinping at the closing meeting of the 14th NPC session, and Li Keqiang, who's the Chinese premier, who met reporters and, of course, talked to media. I'd begin with Xi Jinping. He says people's trust is the biggest motivation for him to forge ahead. He also says that he also stresses on the contribution to building a great country and rejuvenation, national rejuvenation. I'd now revert to Li Keqiang, who says his new government's focus is for the people's aspirations for a better life. That needs to be their ultimate goal. Then he talks about China is going to focus on promoting high quality development and continue to deepen reform and opening up. These are very, very important statements from both the leaders. Is China going to further change itself for the better internally?
Firstly, actually the former Prime Minister and the new Prime Minister's names are very similar. The former was Li Keqiang.
Yes.
The surname
Li
is
Qiang.
Li.
Li Qiang.
The second one is Li Qiang.
Li Qiang. My bad.
So it's a Freudian slip.
My bad. My bad. It is a definite
Actually,
Freudian slip.
Prime Minister Li Keqiang didn't get an extension.
So it's Li Qiang. Yes.
It's Li Qiang. So what is happening is that China, when the Communist Party was established in 1921, before the People's Republic of China, they had 2 centenary goals, which they linked with the founding of the CPC in 1921, which was first was eradicating poverty, which the founding fathers envisioned, which they did after 100 years in 2021. It was celebrated, they eradicated poverty. It's the only country in the world to have completely eradicated poverty. Then in 1949, when the People's Republic of China was born, after the revolution, the second centenary goal of the Communist Party of China was to have a moderately prosperous society, because it's a very big population, as you know, 1.4 billion people. So then what happened was that moderately prosperous society is something which their momentum is gearing towards, they are working towards it. And that is when they talk about internal development and economic development, and Prime Minister Li Qiang's statement is a second centenary goal that is very, very important now for China. You see, Deng Xiaoping, who was the modern, who was after Chairman Mao, who actually revolutionized and opened up China, he said, clean your house before you invite guests. There's a lot of wisdom in that. Basically, that saying meant that consolidate internally, economically, give people the basics, strengthen yourself with the strengthening and empowering the common people. Have a strong middle class, and as you know, then 700 people or 800 million people were lifted out of poverty, and then invite guests, then you interact externally with the neighborhood. So I think this is what we've seen happening. But as you know, there's a lot of humility in the leaders of China. They still consider themselves a developing country.
That is so true. The humility remains, and the fact remains also that with all the facts and figures that we are seeing as far as China and its leadership is concerned, we are only seeing the country that's going to prosper, develop and strengthen itself regionally, globally, and of course nationally as well. Thank you so very much, Mustafa. We have to cut it short. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with new stories and segments. Take care of yourselves. Allah Hafiz.